The first memory Morty ever held wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a soft vibration at the edge of his awareness, like the quiet hum of a lullaby carried from a distant room. He remembered lying on the floor of his tiny bedroom, the window slightly open, letting in the sigh of the night. Stars hung lazily in the sky, stubbornly patient, and a breeze brushed his face with the gentlest insistence, whispering that there was more beyond what he could see. Even at that age, Morty sensed it, not with reasoning or explanation, but with something softer, like a faint echo in the chest that said, "There is more to this world and you are part of it." He didn't understand it yet, and in truth, he wouldn't for years, but even then, it was enough to fill him with a quiet wonder. His earliest days were a tapestry of small, peculiar things that no one else noticed. The way he lingered in the spaces between conversations, absorbing the pauses and the unsaid words. The way he would find a leaf in the yard and stare at it until its veins seemed like the map of some hidden universe. People called him shy, awkward, a little too soft, but to Morty, it felt like tuning into something deeper, listening with his whole being. There were moments when he caught glimpses of other worlds, not in shimmering portals or flashes of light, but in the curve of a shadow, in the way the clouds shifted with almost imperceptible rhythm. Those moments left him breathless, like walking through the corners of dreams he hadn't yet learned to name. His family often moved around, never staying long enough for the streets themselves to grow familiar. But Morty had his own small constellations, moments that traveled with him from house to house, city to city. He remembered the kitchen table in one home, where the sunlight spilled like warm honey over an unfinished sandwich, and he realized he could sit there, quietly thinking, and feel the weight of the universe pressing against his chest in the gentlest way. It was not loneliness. It was a kind of silent understanding that life itself was subtle, patient, waiting for him to notice. And notice he did, even in those days when he felt invisible. Sometimes he would wander to the attic, where forgotten things slept under layers of dust and sunlight. Old boxes creaked when opened, revealing toys long abandoned, photographs where people's faces seemed to hold secrets they never told, and letters that smelled faintly of rain. Morty didn't always know why he was drawn there, only that it felt like listening to a quiet song no one else could hear. There, among forgotten treasures, he learned. Patience, the art of observing without needing to act, of understanding without needing to explain. And in that quiet, he felt the first stirrings of what would become his unusual empathy, the ability to notice the small fractures in hearts around him, the faint tremors of hope, and the unspoken wishes people carried like fragile feathers. At night, before sleep fully claimed him, Morty would look through his window at the stars and wonder if they remembered him, if the same gentle hum he felt as a child traveled through their silver light. Sometimes, in the hush between dreams, he thought he could hear voices, not speaking in words, but in warmth, like the touch of a hand that wasn't there yet. He didn't always understand them, but he understood their intent, their quiet patience, and it comforted him. In those early nights, the universe felt like a friend, a patient, infinitely patient friend, teaching him lessons that no one else could. Even then, he noticed the threads that tied his little world together. A glance from a neighbor that lingered too long, a sudden laugh from his sibling that echoed down the hall, a sunset bleeding orange into grey skies, all of it stitched together into a gentle rhythm that spoke of something larger than himself. It was strange and slightly melancholic, and yet, in that strangeness, Morty felt a kind of belonging. He didn't need to rush, didn't need to understand everything at once, There was a quiet power in simply noticing, in holding these soft moments and letting them shape him. And so Morty's journey began, not with thunder or bright lights, not with danger or heroic feats, but in this quiet, tender awareness. He carried with him the weight and the warmth of small things, the hush of a hallway, the sigh of a night wind, the curve of a cloud in an unfamiliar sky. Each of these small, unremarkable moments was a thread in the tapestry of who he would become, and he felt it already, even in those earliest, slow-breathing days. The tug of worlds waiting to be explored, not with loud footsteps, but with careful, soft attention and a heart wide enough to notice the invisible edges of everything around him. The hum lingered as he drifted into sleep, a soft promise that there was more ahead, a universe unfolding quietly, tenderly, just beyond the reach of ordinary perception. And in that gentle hum, Morty slept, the stars keeping watch, and the first hint of his journey whispering softly into the night. The mornings that followed his early nights of quiet wonder were never ordinary. Morty awoke to the gentle hum of the universe, almost as if the stars themselves had settled over his small chest and whispered, "Wake, little one, there is more to see." He carried the residue of dreams that weren't quite dreams, memories of spaces he had not yet visited, people he had not yet met, and a soft, persistent sense that something within him was shifting, stretching quietly, like the first light, through a narrow window. It was subtle, nothing that anyone else would notice, but to Morty it was as palpable as the taste of sunlight in the morning air. He wandered through the house with careful attentiveness, noticing details he had never noticed before, the way the floorboards creaked in a rhythm, almost like a conversation between walls, the scent of old pages in a book left open on the kitchen counter, the brief glance of a neighbor's cat slipping past the fence with elegant certainty. Each moment felt like a soft echo of something larger, as if the world around him had begun to pulse in harmony with the quiet awareness that had taken root inside him. Even in these small, overlooked moments, Morty began to understand something fundamental, that life was not about loud gestures or dramatic declarations, but about noticing, about being present, and about allowing the subtle currents of existence to flow through him. School was not particularly kind to Morty, though he rarely minded in the way most children did. He watched the other kids with a gentle curiosity rather than envy or frustration, noticing the little cracks in their bravado, the hidden fears behind their laughter, the brief moments when a hand reached for something unseen. It was in these small observations that Morty first began to practice empathy, learning without words that every person carried their own quiet universe within them. Sometimes he would sit quietly by the window during recess, tracing the outline of clouds, imagining them as soft bridges between worlds, and feeling the same tug he had felt as a child, something calling him, something waiting for him beyond. The familiar sky. Morty's family noticed his peculiar attentiveness, though they rarely understood it. His mother would sometimes watch him tilt his head to the side, listening as though the wind carried secrets meant only for him, and smile softly. His father, less patient with subtleties, would shake his head and mutter about daydreaming, but even he could not entirely dismiss the quiet depth in Morty's gaze. It was as if Morty had learned to carry worlds inside him, worlds that were tender and fragile, and that sometimes needed to be held in the palms of a single, attentive heart. One afternoon, Morty discovered a small patch of woods behind a familiar playground, a place he had walked past countless times but never truly noticed. The trees were unusually still, their leaves catching light in a way that seemed almost deliberate, as if the sun and the branches were performing a quiet duet. He stepped inside, and the world seemed to shift slightly, as though he had entered a threshold between ordinary life and something softer, more luminous. Each footstep felt like a note in a slow, melodic symphony. There were no creatures to startle him, no sudden events to demand his attention, only the subtle interplay of light, shadow, and the gentle breathing of the world. It was there, among the trees and the drifting light, that Morty first sensed the faint echo of what would later become his strange connection to the multiverse. Not as a physical gateway, but as a feeling, a resonance, like a chord struck across infinite possibilities. He could feel the weight of unseen lives, faintly humming beneath the leaves, each carrying their own tender stories, and a quiet thrill ran through him. He realized, without fully understanding, that he was not meant to rush or force these experiences. They would unfold in their own time, and all he needed to do was notice, to listen, and to allow himself to grow gently in response. Evenings were soft in their own way, with the sun spilling gold and rose across familiar streets. Morty would return home with pockets full of leaves or stones, each carefully chosen for their texture, color, or shape, as if carrying small fragments of the universe back with him. His hands remembered the quiet lessons of the day, that everything, even the tiniest object, contained a story, and that understanding could be cultivated simply by paying attention. And as he lay in bed at night, he would think of the patch of woods, of the whispering leaves and the faint hum beneath them, and drift into sleep with the sense that the world had already begun to teach him the most important lesson of all, that quiet awareness, gentle curiosity, and a heart willing to hold invisible threads could open doors no one else could see. In those nights, Morty felt the first faint stirrings of courage, not the kind born of triumph or adventure, but the kind that grows slowly, quietly in a heart willing to notice, to care, and to listen. And as he exhaled into sleep, the stars outside his window seemed to nod in recognition, promising that the world was wider, deeper, and softer than he had ever imagined. They whispered again, carrying the same gentle pull he had known as a child, and he allowed himself to surrender, fully and trustingly, to the quiet unfolding of the days ahead. As the weeks passed, Morty began to notice patterns in the world that no one else seemed to see. He saw how the sunlight would pool in a particular corner of the yard just before noon, forming shapes that reminded him of something familiar, yet undefinable, like an echo of a memory he hadn't lived yet. The subtle shifts of air carried stories, too soft for ordinary ears, and he leaned in, curious, learning to listen not only with his ears but with the quiet spaces between his thoughts. Each day the world revealed itself a little more fully to him, and in return he offered the world his gentle attention, a kind of silent reverence that both startled and comforted him. One morning, as dew clung to the grass like tiny glass beads, Morty wandered back to the small patch of woods behind the playground. The trees seemed to recognize him, their leaves trembling in greeting, and he felt a warmth in his chest, a sense that he was not merely passing through, but that he belonged to this place in some unspoken way. He walked slowly, allowing his fingers to brush against the rough bark, feeling the quiet pulse of life within. He thought of the invisible threads connecting him to the world, threads that stretched further than he could see, carrying whispers of far-off places, of lives he would never live, but could somehow feel. It was here, in the hush of that hidden grove, that Morty first sensed the subtle play of possibility, the notion that the world could bend softly around his attention, that small choices could ripple outward in ways too delicate for ordinary observation. He found a stone, smooth and cold, and held it in his palm, noticing the way it seemed to hum faintly against his skin, as if acknowledging him. It was an ordinary stone, and yet, in that moment, it was extraordinary. Morty began to understand, in a way that was not frightening or urgent, but luminous and slow, that the universe had corners meant only for those willing to notice, to feel, and to care. Back at home, his interactions with family deepened in quiet, unremarkable ways that felt monumental to him. A shared glance over the breakfast table, a soft word of encouragement from his mother, a fleeting smile from his father. These were the moments he stored carefully in the recesses of his mind, like bookmarks in the story of his life. Morty learned to recognize the gentle power in such moments. The way a quiet gesture could hold meaning far beyond its appearance. How attention itself was a gift, and how connection, however subtle, shaped the course of existence. School days carried the same delicate lessons, though framed differently. He observed classmates in ways that made him feel simultaneously connected and apart. The girl who always hummed softly to herself seemed to carry her own hidden universe, just as fragile and luminous as his own. Morty watched without interrupting, allowing understanding to bloom quietly between them. He learned to read the silences, the hesitations, the fleeting glances, realizing that the spaces between words often carried more truth than the words themselves. And as he noticed, he felt the hum again, the faint, comforting pulse of life extending beyond him, threading through people, trees, sky, and stone alike. By the time the afternoons stretched into evenings, Morty would often find himself lying in a quiet corner of his room, tracing shadows cast by the fading sun. He imagined the shadows moving through other worlds, tracing their own delicate paths, and he felt a strange companionship with them. They were not simply absence of light, he realized, but a presence in themselves, a soft, breathing counterpart to the light he so often admired. It was this interplay, the constant giving and taking of notice and presence, that began to shape him, molding his heart and mind into something tender, perceptive, and deeply aware. One evening, as twilight seeped through the window in slow, lavender waves, Morty thought about the pull he had always felt in his chest, the gentle tug that had first visited him in his earliest memory. He no longer questioned it with fear or confusion. Instead, he welcomed it like a friend who had been waiting patiently all along. It was a quiet promise, a nudge toward something unseen but profoundly real, and he let himself be guided by it. Morty understood, even in this tender stage of life, that growth need not roar. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it shimmered faintly, in a stone or a shadow, and sometimes it moved through the spaces between breaths. That night, as he drifted into sleep, the hum settled over him like a soft blanket. He dreamt of trees that reached for the stars, of rivers flowing not with water, but with light, and of paths that wound endlessly through worlds, both strange and familiar. There was no rush, no urgency, only the gentle unfolding of everything, around him and inside him. And as his eyelids grew heavy and the stars outside his window glimmered with quiet recognition, Morty allowed himself to sink fully into the soft rhythm of the universe, trusting that each small observation, each tender awareness was guiding him slowly and surely toward the journey that awaited beyond the known. The days grew longer, and the seasons shifted with a quiet, almost imperceptible rhythm, and Morty began to feel the subtle weight of change pressing gently against the edges of his world. Spring arrived with an elegance that seemed to breathe directly into him. The scent of wet earth after rain, the faint vibration of bees hovering in sunlight, and the tender green of new leaves unfolding like careful whispers. He wandered through these mornings with the same gentle attentiveness that had shaped his earliest explorations, noticing the way shadows leaned differently over the yard, how the wind carried the faint laughter of far-off children, and how even the stones beneath his feet seemed to hum softly under his touch. Each small detail was a revelation, a reminder that the world held layers that could only be discovered by those willing to notice. In these weeks, Morty's friendships began to take shape in the softest of ways. He found himself drawn to a boy in his class who always lingered behind after recess, watching clouds with an intensity that mirrored his own. The two would sometimes sit quietly together, speaking in pauses rather than words, noticing the colors in the sky or the way the wind pressed against the window pane. Morty didn't always understand the thoughts of his companion, but he understood the heart beneath them, the silent pulse that echoed his own. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, this companionship taught him another lesson. That connection, like light, often traveled in subtle beams rather than blinding brilliance. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that Morty first began to see glimpses of something he could not yet name, a gentle flicker at the edge of his perception. He was lying on the grass, tracing the shape of clouds that seemed to twist and fold into impossible forms, when he noticed a shimmer between the trees at the far edge of the yard. Not a reflection of sunlight, nor a trick of shadow, but a soft, almost musical ripple that tugged at the corners of his awareness. His chest stirred with the familiar pull he had carried since childhood, a sensation both intimate and mysterious. It was neither frightening nor urgent. It simply hummed with the quiet invitation of something vast waiting to be discovered. Morty did not rush toward it. Instead, he observed, letting curiosity stretch through him slowly, like the pull of a slow tide. He noticed the patterns of the leaves, the subtle sway of branches, the way the shadows curved around the light. Each breath seemed to anchor him more firmly in the moment, and in doing so, he realized that this quiet flicker was not separate from him, but something that resonated with his own growing awareness. He felt the tiniest thrill, not the kind born of excitement, but of recognition, a soft understanding that he was beginning to glimpse the edges of the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. Evenings carried their own gentle lessons. Morty began to notice the rhythms of those around him more keenly, the faint tremor in his mother's hands as she washed dishes, the soft exhalation of his father when he sank into the living room chair, the way the family cat padded silently across the floor and then paused as if sensing Morty's quiet attention. He began to understand that life was stitched together from small threads, some invisible, some fragile, but all meaningful, and in that understanding he felt the first real stirrings of responsibility, not the kind that demanded action or obedience, but the kind that asked only that he hold awareness and care for the small things entrusted to him. One evening, as the sky softened into a haze of lavender and gold, Morty wandered once more into the woods behind the playground. The shimmering flicker he had noticed before was there again, delicate and persistent, bending around the trunks of the trees like a subtle melody. This time he stepped closer, and as he did, he felt a peculiar sense of expansiveness, as though the woods themselves were breathing with him, aware of his presence. He knelt by the roots of an old oak, tracing the grooves in the bark, and allowed himself to listen with every sense. It was here, in this slow communion, that he first understood that perception itself could be a kind of passage, soft, quiet, and deliberate, through which he could glimpse not only the world around him, but the hidden currents of existence stretching beyond it. That night, as Morty lay in bed, he thought of the shimmer, the quiet pull, and the invisible threads he had begun to notice everywhere. He realized that even in the smallest gestures, even in moments of silence, the universe was revealing itself to him in gentle ways. And as sleep crept over his eyelids, carrying him into the soft folds of dreams, he allowed himself to settle into the tender rhythm of awareness, trusting that each day, each observation, and each quiet moment would guide him slowly and surely toward the journey that awaited. A journey not marked by grand gestures or dramatic feats, but by the soft unfolding of insight, connection, and understanding, one gentle breath at a time. By the time summer's warmth settled fully into the air, Morty had grown accustomed to noticing the quiet choreography of the world around him. Every morning the sun slipped through the cracks in his window at an angle that seemed almost deliberate, casting patterns on the floor that shifted imperceptibly with the hours. He would lie in bed a little longer, tracing the shapes with his eyes, feeling the faint tug of wonder in his chest that had always accompanied him. It was not excitement in the usual sense, nor a rush of urgency, but a steady, soft current, reminding him that even the smallest things could carry meaning if one chose to notice. The gentle cadence of days and nights, of shadows and light, became his companion, teaching him that the universe could be both immense and intimate at the same time. On one particularly slow afternoon, Morty returned to the patch of woods behind the playground, carrying nothing but a small notebook and a pencil. He had begun to record observations, not as a chore but as a kind of quiet conversation with the world. He wrote down the way sunlight filtered through the leaves, the soft hum of insects that rose and fell like invisible breaths, and the way the ground beneath him seemed to pulse faintly with unseen life. Each notation was a meditation, a way of honoring the small, persistent mysteries that had always fascinated him. In these moments, Morty felt both the solitude and the presence of the world as a companion, an understanding that comforted him deeply. It was here, in this slow practice of attention, that Morty first sensed the shape of empathy taking form within him. He began to notice not only the world itself, but the beings inhabiting it, the squirrels skittering along branches, the birds calling softly from hidden perches, the occasional passerby whose eyes held stories they could not speak aloud. He felt the faint echo of their emotions, a subtle vibration that he could sense without understanding completely. The awareness was tender and fragile, and he handled it with care, learning early on that even a soft touch could carry significance. It was in these quiet interactions that he realized the essence of connection, noticing without imposing and responding with gentleness rather than force. As the summer stretched onward, Morty's relationships with others began to deepen in ways that were slow, almost imperceptible, but profoundly meaningful. He shared a quiet bond with the boy he had met at school, sitting together beneath trees, letting the wind carry their mutual attentiveness like a soft, shared secret. He noticed how a simple gesture, a nod, a smile, a moment of listening, could create a bridge between hearts. His understanding of these small bonds grew steadily, teaching him that heroism need not roar or strike. It could exist in the quiet practice of kindness, in the patience to see and honor the inner worlds of others. One evening, As the sky ripened into the colors of dusk, Morty wandered to the edge of the woods and found himself near a small, hidden pond. The water lay still and reflective, a surface that mirrored not only the world above, but something deeper, almost infinite, below. He knelt at the edge, running his fingers through the cool surface, watching the ripples stretch outward in delicate arcs. And as he did, he felt a familiar tug in his chest, the same gentle call that had guided him since childhood. This time, it was not merely curiosity or wonder. It was the first hint of recognition, a quiet understanding that there were worlds beyond his own waiting for him, not with spectacle, but with soft invitation. The nights that followed were filled with the same tender reflection. Morty would lie in bed, replaying the day in his mind like a slow, soothing melody. He thought of the woods, of the shimmering ripples in the pond, of the friendships that had begun to bloom in quiet spaces. He thought of the unseen currents threading through everything, connecting stone to leaf, tree to sky, heart to heart. And in those thoughts, he felt a growing awareness that he was not merely a passive observer of the world. He was a part of its unfolding story, a gentle participant in a tapestry that extended far beyond what he could see. One night, as he drifted towards sleep, Morty imagined the pond under the stars, each ripple stretching outward into unseen possibilities. He imagined the boy he had grown close to, the animals he had watched quietly, the shadows that moved with their own gentle rhythm, and he felt a deep, calming resonance. It was a sense of belonging, not in the loud way of crowds or celebration, but in the quiet, meditative acknowledgement that the universe, in all its vastness, had given him a place, and that he, in turn, had begun to hold space for it. And with that gentle thought, he allowed himself to exhale fully, sinking into sleep with the soft hum of awareness that would guide him through days and nights yet to come, always gently, always slowly, toward the mysteries, waiting quietly, just beyond perception. As the days drifted softly from summer into the early hints of autumn, Morty began to notice a quiet shift within himself, subtle and steady, like the slow turning of the seasons. It was not a sudden realization, nor a dramatic awakening, but a gentle widening of perception, a deeper attunement to the currents of life that had always whispered at the edges of his awareness. The sun slanted differently through his window in the mornings, warmer and more golden, and the wind carried the faint, earthy scent of leaves beginning to turn. Morty felt the change not only in the world outside, but in the careful spaces within. Himself, a tender stirring of awareness that reached into the smallest moments of his day. He continued to visit the patch of woods behind the playground, carrying his notebook less often now, having learned that the act of noticing did not require writing it down. He moved through the trees with the same reverent attention he had cultivated over months, feeling the hum beneath his feet, the gentle brush of air across his skin, and the way light folded and unfolded between the leaves. The forest no longer seemed merely a place he wandered. It was a companion, offering him guidance through silence, teaching him patience, and allowing him to recognize the soft shapes of possibility that threaded through every living thing. It was during one of these walks that Morty encountered the first true reflection of another presence, an awareness that resonated in gentle, almost musical waves. A small, delicate bird had perched on a low branch, tilting its head as though it recognized him. Morty felt an immediate, inexplicable kinship, noticing not only the bird's form, but the subtle rhythm of its breath, the quiet tremor of its wings, and the way its gaze seemed to hold a story that had never been told aloud. He did not reach for it, did not disturb the moment, but instead sat quietly, allowing the resonance to grow, learning that connection could be profound without words or motion, existing simply in acknowledgement and respect. At school, the subtleties of human interaction became clearer to him too. He watched classmates with the patience of someone tracing constellations, noticing the fleeting glances, the pauses before speech, the faint tremors of emotion that revealed what they did not say. A soft awareness settled in him that each person carried invisible worlds, delicate and complex, and that he could move gently among them, offering understanding without interruption. Morty began to understand empathy not as a grand act, but as a quiet daily practice of noticing and responding to the spaces between hearts. It was a skill he nurtured like a tiny flame, careful not to let it burn too fiercely or fade into neglect. One late afternoon, as shadows stretched long and the air carried a slight chill, Morty wandered toward the small pond he had discovered months before. The surface was perfectly still, reflecting the sky as though it were a window into another dimension, and he leaned closer, his reflection meeting him with quiet attentiveness. He noticed ripples begin to spread, small and deliberate, as if the water itself was breathing in response to his presence. In that moment, Morty felt a deeper understanding of his connection to the unseen, that he could sense the subtle vibrations of life, the faint echoes of emotion, and the tender patterns that bound beings and places together. It was not power in the traditional sense, nor was it urgency. It was the gentle knowledge that attention itself could shape experience, that the act of noticing could become an opening, a bridge, a soft passage through which unseen things could be understood. Evenings grew longer and filled with a gentle, contemplative quiet. Morty often lingered at the edge of his bed, gazing out the window at stars that had begun to appear in slow, deliberate procession. He thought of the small bird in the woods, of the ripples on the pond, of the boy at school, who shared his quiet attentiveness, and of all the invisible threads he had begun to feel between himself and the world. Each night, these threads seemed to hum more clearly, carrying him toward understanding without rushing him, encouraging him to trust in the slow unfolding of insight, the patient cultivation of empathy, and the subtle blossoming of awareness that moved quietly through time. On one such evening, as twilight spilled lavender and gold across the sky, Morty allowed himself to lean fully into the sensation of presence, both in himself and in the world. He felt his heart expand just enough to hold the rhythm of the day, the echoes of motion and breath, and the soft currents of life that flowed around him like an invisible river. He understood, in that quiet stretch of time, that growth did not require spectacle, that heroism could live in softness, and that the quiet nurturing of awareness could be the most profound journey of all. And so, as he drifted into sleep, wrapped in the lingering warmth of dusk and the soft hum of unseen worlds, Morty carried with him a quiet promise that each day, each observation, and each gentle act of care would guide him further, ever so slowly, toward the unfolding of mysteries that were at once intimate, expansive, and tenderly infinite. The first crisp mornings of autumn brought with them a quiet attentiveness that settled over Morty like a familiar blanket. The air carried the subtle fragrance of turning leaves, a gentle mix of earth and sun-warmed wood, and he walked to school with his senses alert, noticing how the light shifted in ways that made the familiar street seem almost new. Each leaf that drifted to the ground was a tiny revelation, each breath of wind a soft messenger, and Morty found himself slowing, leaning into the rhythm of the world rather than rushing past it. He began to understand that the universe had a pace of its own, one that was not loud or commanding, but persistent and patient, and that by aligning himself gently with it, he could sense layers of reality that often went unnoticed. At school, his quiet attentiveness began to attract small but meaningful connections. The boy he had met months ago had begun to seek him out more intentionally, and they would sit together beneath the trees at recess, watching clouds drift in endless, intricate formations. Sometimes they spoke, but often they simply observed, the silence itself becoming a shared language. Morty noticed that in these moments the world felt larger and softer simultaneously. He sensed that even the smallest act of attention could ripple outward, touching lives in ways that were invisible, yet profound. It was a lesson in patience, in empathy, and in the subtle power of presence, lessons that he carried with him carefully, like a stone warmed by sunlight. One afternoon, Morty found himself drawn again to the woods behind the playground. The light had shifted, filtering through the branches in long, warm fingers, and he felt the familiar tug in his chest, a whisper urging him to look closer, to listen more carefully. As he wandered, he came across a small, shallow hollow beneath the roots of an ancient oak, where the ground seemed to hum faintly beneath his fingertips. Kneeling there, Morty realized that he could sense more than he had before, the faint rhythm of life in the soil, the subtle energy of the leaves above, even the soft echoes of creatures passing beyond sight. It was not something to be grasped or understood immediately, but to be acknowledged, to be held tenderly, like a fragile memory or an unspoken truth. That evening, as he returned home with pockets full of fallen leaves and acorns, Morty began to reflect on the quiet bonds he had formed. The boy from school, the woods, the small creatures he had begun to notice, they were all threads in a tapestry that he was learning to hold gently. He understood that connection did not require words, nor did it demand action beyond simple awareness. It was enough to notice, to acknowledge, to hold presence, as one might hold a small flame against the wind, allowing it to glow steadily without force or urgency. Morty's mother noticed the change in him as well. She observed his quiet attentiveness, the way he lingered by windows at dusk, watching the sky deepen into shades of violet and amber, and she smiled softly, though she did not speak of it. His father, less attuned to subtleties, offered small remarks about Morty's habit of daydreaming, but even these carried a hidden affection, the way all things sometimes contain warmth if one looks carefully. Morty felt these layers of care and recognition, understanding that the smallest gestures often carried the most profound resonance. As twilight deepened into evening, Morty returned to his favorite corner of his bedroom, near the window that framed the first stars of night. He traced the patterns of light and shadow with his eyes, noticing how the shapes shifted imperceptibly, like soft conversations between darkness and illumination. He thought of the hollow beneath the oak, of the bird that had tilted its head at him in recognition, and of the boy who shared his quiet attention. Each memory pulsed softly in his chest, a quiet reminder that life's richness lay not in grand events or spectacle, but in subtle observation, patient listening, and the delicate art of noticing. That night, as he slipped beneath the covers, Morty allowed himself to feel the gentle hum of existence weaving through his thoughts. He imagined the ripples of unseen energy stretching outward from the pond, the whispering winds among the trees, and the invisible threads connecting hearts across space and time. These thoughts carried neither urgency nor anxiety, only a sense of soft promise that if he continued to move gently, to notice carefully, and to honor the quiet mysteries around him, he would gradually come to understand the broader rhythm of the world and his place within it. And as his eyelids grew heavy, the stars outside blinking into existence one by one, Morty exhaled fully, allowing himself to surrender to sleep. In the gentle stretch of that exhale, he felt the first deep resonance of what was to come. That growth, connection, and understanding could be cultivated softly over time through attention, empathy, and patience. The universe, vast and infinite, seemed to nod in quiet acknowledgement, and he drifted into dreams filled with softly shifting worlds, waiting patiently, as he always had, for him to arrive. The mornings grew cooler as autumn settled fully over the town, and Morty found a quiet delight in the subtle shift of air that carried the scent of fallen leaves, wood smoke from distant chimneys, and the faint hint of rain lingering overnight. There was a rhythm in it, a gentle cadence that seemed to speak directly to him, urging him to slow his steps and attune himself to the world's quieter melodies. Even the sidewalks, familiar and cracked from years of weather, seemed to hold secrets when sunlight fell at the right angle, casting long, delicate shadows that shifted imperceptibly with the day. Morty walked among them with careful attentiveness, feeling the hum of life beneath the ordinary and letting it guide him toward the small moments he had begun to cherish. School routines carried the same soft undercurrent. Morty noticed details in his classmates that went unseen by most, the subtle slump of shoulders that hinted at hidden burdens, the brief spark of curiosity in a peer's eyes, and the moments of hesitation that hinted at unspoken thoughts. He listened, not just with ears, but with the spaces between, cultivating a quiet awareness that allowed him to sense the faint tremors of emotion beneath ordinary words. This awareness, practiced daily, began to shape him in profound ways, encouraging patience, empathy, and a soft attentiveness that felt like a bridge between him and the wider world. He understood, slowly, that presence itself could be a form of kindness, and that observation, without judgment, could open doors to understanding others that words often could not. After school, Morty made his way once again to the small patch of woods he had grown to love. The trees stood taller now, leaves a mixture of amber and rust, their branches whispering softly in the wind. He wandered along familiar paths, allowing himself to notice not only what was visible, but also the subtler rhythms, the rustle of a small animal beneath a bush, the faint scent of moss clinging to bark, the gentle undulation of shadows cast by slowly shifting clouds. Here, in the quiet embrace of the forest, Morty felt a growing resonance within himself, a sense that he was beginning to sense the invisible threads connecting all things. It was not knowledge in the conventional sense, nor power in any ordinary measure, but a delicate awareness that stretched quietly through space, brushing against things that could not otherwise be touched. At the far edge of the woods, Morty found the hollow beneath the old oak tree, where the ground seemed to pulse faintly under his touch. He knelt there and breathed deeply, feeling the rhythm of life in the soil and the whisper of unseen currents that threaded through everything around him. He noticed how small actions, like pressing a hand gently against the bark or speaking in soft tones to the hollow space beneath the roots, seemed to echo outward as though the world itself was responding to his attentiveness. This understanding filled him with quiet awe, and he began to realize that his presence could shape experience subtly and tenderly without the need for grand gestures or force. Evenings stretched long and contemplative. Morty often returned home with pockets full of leaves, pine cones, and smooth stones, each one carefully chosen for its texture, shape, or the faint resonance it seemed to hold. He placed them on his windowsill, arranging them as if to create a small, private universe, a collection of quiet reminders that the world contained layers that could be discovered only through gentle attention. And as he gazed out at the sky, watching the first stars of night appear, he felt a growing awareness that the threads connecting him to the world were more than metaphor. They were tangible, subtle, and infinitely patient, carrying a soft promise of what lay ahead. One evening, as twilight seeped across the rooftops, Morty lingered at his window, thinking of the boy from school who shared his quiet attentiveness, of the small bird in the woods, and of the pond that mirrored the sky with serene clarity. Each memory pulsed softly, a reminder of the gentle bonds that had begun to form in his life. And as he exhaled, allowing himself to sink fully into the calm of night, he sensed for the first time that these bonds, these threads, were not merely connections between him and other beings. They were hints of something larger, a rhythm that stretched beyond the familiar streets, the trees, and even the stars. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable, a whisper that the universe held paths not yet visible, and that Morty, with patience and care, would one day find them. As sleep approached, Morty felt the familiar hum settle over him, gentle and encompassing, carrying the soft assurance that even the smallest acts of attention and empathy could guide him toward understanding and discovery. The world was patient, persistent, and tenderly infinite, and he felt himself becoming part of its quiet rhythm. And in that quiet exhale, as the stars blinked through the window and the night held him in soft embrace, Morty allowed himself to surrender fully to sleep, trusting the unseen threads to guide him toward the unfolding mysteries that awaited, always gently, always patiently, just beyond the edges of perception. The mornings grew colder still as autumn deepened, and the crisp air seemed to carry a gentle urgency that urged Morty to linger a little longer in observation. The leaves, now a tapestry of amber, gold, and copper, fluttered in slow spirals to the ground, each one tracing its own delicate path as though rehearsing for an unseen audience. Morty walked among them with a calm attentiveness, noticing the subtle differences in texture and color, the way some crinkled underfoot while others remained almost perfectly intact. These small details, which others might have overlooked, whispered to him of the persistent rhythm of life, quiet, patient, and infinitely intricate. At school, Morty's quiet attentiveness had begun to attract others who seemed similarly attuned to subtle rhythms. The boy he had spent hours observing beneath the trees had begun to join him more often, sharing moments of silence that felt as rich as conversation. Morty noticed how these shared silences held a soft power, a gentle reassurance. That understanding did not always require words. Even the briefest gestures, a tilt of the head, a glance toward a leaf caught in sunlight, or the simple act of listening, wove invisible threads between hearts, teaching him the quiet potency of presence and attention. After school, Morty's path often led him back to the small woods behind the playground, a sanctuary that had become more than mere refuge. Each step carried him deeper into its quiet embrace, where the rustling leaves and soft hum of unseen creatures formed a slow, meditative cadence. One afternoon, he noticed the pond at the far edge reflecting the sunlight in a way that created ripples of color as though the water itself were whispering secrets to the sky. He knelt at the edge, letting his fingers skim the surface, feeling the faint vibration beneath his touch. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it resonated deep within him, a confirmation that his quiet attentiveness was connecting him to something larger than the world immediately visible. Morty began to experiment with these perceptions, learning to stretch his awareness gently beyond what could be seen or heard. He would close his eyes among the trees and imagine the rhythm of life pulsing beneath the soil, extending up through roots and branches and into the wind. He sensed the faint energy of creatures hidden from view, the subtle pull of air currents, and the soft echo of footsteps long past. These exercises were not about control, nor about seeking power. They were about learning patience, listening, and recognizing the interconnectedness of all things. And with each attempt, Morty felt himself expanding quietly, tuning into a frequency that existed between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Evenings were filled with the same slow reverie. Morty returned home with small tokens from the woods, stones smoothed by time, acorns with perfectly formed caps, and leaves whose veins glimmered in fading light. He placed them carefully on his windowsill, arranging them as a private constellation, a reminder of the quiet truths he had discovered that day. And as he gazed up at the stars beginning to appear in the indigo sky, he felt a deep, comforting resonance, as if each small discovery, each tender observation, were threads leading him somewhere important, somewhere just beyond his current understanding. One evening, as twilight spread soft shadows across his bedroom floor, Morty thought of the boy from school, the bird in the woods, and the ripples on the pond. Each memory pulsed gently, a quiet rhythm he could feel in his chest. He began to understand that these connections, however subtle, were part of a larger pattern, a network of presence that stretched beyond sight and sound, hinting at a more expansive world that he had yet to experience. There was no urgency in this awareness, no pressure to act, only the patient, luminous promise of discovery waiting for him to approach with care and attention. As night deepened, Morty lay beneath his blankets, tracing constellations with his eyes and letting the quiet hum of the universe settle over him. He thought of the woods, of the pond, of the small creatures he had begun to notice, and of the invisible threads that connected them all. The soft pull he had felt since childhood seemed to grow ever more present, a gentle guide leading him toward experiences he could not yet name. And as he allowed himself to exhale fully, sinking into sleep, Morty carried a tender understanding with him that growth, connection, and awareness did not need to be loud or dramatic. They could exist in the quiet attentiveness of a heart, willing to see, feel, and hold the delicate, unseen currents that flowed through the world. In that moment, as dreams began to gather around him like slow, drifting clouds, Morty trusted the rhythm of life, patient and enduring. The universe was vast, but it spoke in whispers, not shouts, and he had learned to listen. And in that gentle surrender, he felt the soft beginnings of courage, the kind born not of bravado, but of quiet understanding and tender perception. A courage that would carry him into the mysteries waiting just beyond the familiar, slowly, gently, and without fear. The days grew shorter, and the crisp autumn light began to filter through the trees with a golden hue that seemed almost deliberate, as though the world itself was framing each moment for Morty to notice. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of damp earth, fallen leaves, and smoke drifting from chimneys in the distance. Morty walked slowly, deliberately, taking in the textures of the world around him, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the whisper of wind through branches, the gentle rhythm of life that pulsed through both visible and hidden spaces. He felt increasingly aware of the subtle dance of presence and absence, noticing the small energies that connected beings, objects, and spaces, and feeling a quiet resonance with the currents of life. At school, the lessons of attention and empathy that Morty had been cultivating revealed themselves in small but significant ways. He noticed classmates in moments of quiet need, a hand hovering uncertainly over a page of homework, a glance that flickered with hesitation, or a soft sigh barely carried above the shuffle of chairs. He learned to respond without fanfare, offering, understanding through presence rather than words, a subtle acknowledgement that often went unnoticed by others but resonated deeply nonetheless. Morty began to understand that heroism did not always manifest in grand actions. Sometimes it existed in the patience to see, the willingness to understand, and the quiet care that threads hearts together. After school, Morty wandered once again into the woods behind the playground, drawn to the familiar sanctuary where shadows and light performed their slow, shifting ballet. The pond at the edge glimmered faintly, mirroring the pale sunlight and the slow descent of leaves. Morty knelt at its edge, letting his fingertips skim the surface, feeling the soft ripples radiate outward. It was in these quiet, repetitive acts that he sensed the faintest traces of something greater, a pulse that seemed to extend beyond the trees, beyond the water, and into the unseen spaces between moments. He understood with a gentle clarity that his presence could harmonize with these subtle currents, and that even the smallest attention could carry weight in ways too delicate for ordinary perception. One day, as he explored a new path through the woods, Morty noticed a fallen branch shaped like a delicate arch. Beneath it, the sunlight pooled in golden pools, illuminating the moss and small stones, as though revealing a hidden stage for quiet wonders. Morty paused, letting his gaze drift over the scene. He realized that the world was full of such spaces, unnoticed by many, yet alive with their own small magic. These discoveries did not thrill him with excitement. They comforted him with a sense of belonging, as though the universe had been waiting patiently for someone willing to see, willing to listen, and willing to hold space for its quiet mysteries. Evenings at home were spent in similar reflection. Morty would sit by his window arranging leaves, stones, and acorns on the sill, each chosen for texture, color, or the faint resonance it seemed to hold. The collection grew slowly, a constellation of small discoveries, and each item reminded him of the threads connecting all things. The stars above appeared gradually, flickering into view as night deepened. Morty traced constellations with his eyes and imagined the unseen currents weaving through the sky, stretching into realms he had yet to comprehend, hinting at a larger, gentler rhythm of life waiting just beyond what he could see. One evening, as twilight softened into night, Morty thought of the boy from school who had become his silent companion, of the bird that had watched him with quiet recognition, and of the small pond reflecting the sky. Each memory pulsed softly in his chest, a rhythm of connection he could feel but not fully articulate. He sensed that these threads, delicate and persistent, were more than coincidences. They were hints of a world layered beyond the visible, alive with subtle forces and quiet possibilities. And for the first time, he felt an almost tangible awareness of the vastness beyond his immediate experience, a gentle whisper that suggested the presence of places, beings, and experiences not yet within reach, but somehow familiar. As sleep approached, Morty lay beneath the covers, feeling the quiet hum of awareness settle over him like a soft blanket. He thought of the trees, the pond, the small creatures, and the invisible threads connecting them all. There was no urgency, no pressure, only a steady, comforting rhythm, a patient pulse that suggested growth, connection, and discovery could unfold slowly, deliberately, and without force. And as his eyelids closed, he surrendered fully to the gentle pull of the unseen, trusting that these small observations, tender moments, and quiet attentiveness would guide him toward experiences yet to come, slowly, patiently, and with care, toward mysteries waiting softly beyond the edges of perception. The first frost of the season came quietly, dusting the grass and the edges of the woods with a delicate shimmer that seemed almost too fragile to hold. Morty noticed it at dawn, when the world was still muted and the air carried a crisp, bracing clarity. Each blade of grass glinted faintly in the early light, and the leaves that had lingered on branches shivered with the touch of cold. Morty walked slowly, deliberately, feeling the subtle contrast between warmth and chill on his skin, and letting his attention settle on the intricate beauty that surrounded him. There was a gentle rhythm to the frost, a quiet cadence that seemed to speak directly to him, urging him to move softly and observe with care. At school, Morty found that his growing attentiveness extended naturally to the rhythms of human interaction. He noticed the small hesitations in others' movements, the faint sighs that betrayed unspoken concerns, and the tiny gestures of kindness that often went unnoticed. His ability to perceive these subtle cues brought a new depth to his interactions, though he did not announce it, nor did he seek recognition. Instead, he simply responded with a gentle attentiveness that made others feel quietly seen, as if their inner worlds had been acknowledged without need for explanation. Morty began to understand that presence could be a gift in itself, a way of holding space for others in a way that was both tender and profound. After school, he wandered once more into the woods, noticing how the frost had transformed familiar paths into something almost magical. The pond at the far edge reflected the pale light, shimmering as if it had captured fragments of the sky itself. Morty knelt by its edge, letting his fingers trace the icy surface, feeling the faint vibration beneath his touch. He sensed the subtle currents flowing not only in water but through the air, through the soil, and through the living things hidden in the trees and brush. It was not something he could name or control. It was simply there, an ever-present hum that resonated softly with his own awareness. And in feeling it, he recognized the gentle truth that the act of noticing could open doors to understanding that ordinary perception could not reach. One afternoon, as he explored a narrow path winding between oaks and maples, Morty came across a small bird perched silently on a low branch. Its feathers were fluffed against the cold, and its gaze met his with a quiet, steady recognition. Morty crouched slowly, holding still, and he felt a gentle connection form, delicate yet undeniably present. It was a confirmation of what he had sensed for some time, that awareness, when offered without judgment or expectation, could create bridges to unseen worlds and unseen lives. He remained there for several minutes, breathing in rhythm with the forest, feeling the soft pulse of life in every leaf, branch, and stone. Evenings were filled with quiet reflection. Morty returned home with pockets full of frost-touched leaves and twigs, arranging them carefully on his windowsill alongside stones and acorns collected earlier in the season. Each item seemed to hold a memory, a trace of the day's gentle observations, and together they formed a constellation of small truths that grounded him in the continuity of life. As he gazed up at the stars beginning to twinkle above, he thought of the invisible threads connecting the woods, the pond, the bird, the boy from school, and himself. Each thread pulsed softly in his awareness, a quiet reminder that connection did not always need to be loud or immediate. It could exist in stillness, patience, and tender attention. One twilight, Morty paused by the pond and watched his reflection ripple in the shifting light, thinking of the currents that seemed to flow, both within and beyond him. He sensed, with growing clarity, that these subtle energies extended past the familiar world into spaces not yet visible, hinting at experiences that waited quietly, patiently, just beyond his understanding. There was no urgency, no demand, only a soft invitation to move slowly, observe deeply, and allow insight to unfold naturally. He realized that the awareness he was cultivating was a kind of gentle preparation, a practice of listening to the hidden rhythms of existence so that he could someday walk confidently in the unseen paths that lay ahead. As night approached, Morty returned home and settled into the comforting quiet of his bedroom, letting the soft hum of awareness fill his mind. He thought of the frost, the pond, the bird, and the boy from school, of all the small threads connecting life in delicate, almost invisible ways. And as sleep gathered around him like a warm, protective cloak, he allowed himself to exhale fully, carrying a tender understanding that growth, empathy, and perception could unfold quietly, steadily, and without haste. The world, vast and intricate, would continue to whisper its secrets, and he would continue to listen, always gently, always attentively, trusting the subtle currents to guide him toward the experiences that awaited just beyond the familiar. The early mornings of winter carried a quiet stillness that seemed to hold the entire town in a gentle pause. Frost clung to the edges of windows, and the air carried a crispness that made every breath feel sharp yet invigorating. Morty walked carefully along familiar streets, noticing the delicate patterns of ice forming on puddles, the way bare branches etched intricate silhouettes against the pale sky, and the soft crunch of frost underfoot. Each step seemed to echo faintly in the cold, and he allowed himself to move slowly, absorbing the textures and rhythms of the world around him. The subtle beauty of this frozen landscape felt like a gift, a reminder that even in stillness, life carried quiet vitality. School offered new lessons in patience and observation. Morty noticed the faint tremors of emotion in others more keenly now, the careful hesitation of a classmate's hand poised over a page, the flicker of a shy smile, or the fleeting tension in someone's posture. He responded not with words, but with a gentle presence, a subtle acknowledgement that could be felt without being spoken aloud. His classmates, though largely unaware, began to feel a quiet comfort in his attentiveness. Morty learned that sometimes the simplest forms of connection, an understanding glance, a patient pause, were far more powerful than any loud declaration. Empathy, he realized, was not a spectacle, but a steady, quiet practice. After school, the woods behind the playground called to him with their familiar, comforting pull. The pond lay still beneath the muted light, its surface shimmering faintly like silver under the cold winter sun. Morty knelt by the edge and let his fingers brush the icy surface, feeling the delicate vibrations beneath. He listened to the soft whisper of wind through the trees and sensed the subtle rhythms of life that persisted even under frost. These currents of energy, imperceptible to most, pulsed steadily in alignment with his awareness, creating a quiet resonance that felt like a private dialogue with the world. Here, Morty realized, the ordinary became extraordinary simply through the act of paying attention. One afternoon, Morty discovered a hidden path lined with evergreens, their dark green needles contrasting sharply against the pale winter landscape. He moved through the soft hush of fallen snow, noticing the faint tracks of small animals, squirrels, birds, and unseen creatures that spoke of hidden lives continuing quietly beneath the surface. He paused often, listening, feeling, observing, and understanding that even the smallest forms of life carried their own rhythms, worthy of recognition. In these moments, Morty felt a deep, calming sense of belonging, as if the forest itself had welcomed him as both observer and participant, a guardian of its subtle secrets. Evenings were now longer and filled with quiet reflection. Morty returned, home with small treasures from the woods, pine cones dusted with frost, twigs shaped like tiny arcs, and stones whose surfaces had been smoothed by time. He arranged them carefully on his windowsill, alongside the leaves and acorns collected in previous seasons, creating a delicate constellation of memories and observations. Each item reminded him that the world was layered, that each day offered subtle truths waiting to be acknowledged. And as the stars began to twinkle faintly above, Morty felt the threads connecting all these experiences: the boy from school, the bird in the woods, the pond, the forest, and himself, pulsing gently in his awareness. One quiet evening, as twilight deepened and the first snow began to fall lightly from the sky, Morty paused by the window. He watched as individual flakes traced slow, deliberate paths to the ground, each one unique yet part of a larger pattern. He felt with gentle certainty that the rhythms he had been cultivating, the act of noticing, listening, and connecting, were forming a subtle readiness within him. It was not a readiness for adventure in the conventional sense, nor for grandeur or spectacle, but a readiness to perceive and engage with dimensions of life that extended beyond the ordinary, just beyond the edges of his current experience. As night gathered fully and the world outside hushed into a blanket of snow, Morty lay beneath his covers, letting the quiet hum of awareness settle over him. He thought of the hidden paths, the frost-covered pond, the bird, the boy from school, and all the small threads connecting these moments. Sleep approached like a gentle tide, carrying with it the soft assurance that growth, empathy, and attentiveness could unfold slowly and steadily without force or urgency. And as his breath deepened and the world outside glittered in the gentle embrace of winter, Morty surrendered fully to rest, carrying with him a quiet understanding that the rhythms he had been attuning to would guide him patiently, gently, toward experiences yet unseen and toward the unfolding of mysteries waiting softly beyond the familiar. The snow deepened over the town, laying a quiet, glimmering coat upon rooftops, streets, and the familiar woods beyond the playground. Morty stepped outside one morning and felt the crisp air embrace him like a soft exhale, cool against his cheeks, yet invigorating in its clarity. Every breath seemed to carry tiny, sparkling particles of the world, and he walked slowly, letting the crunch of snow beneath his boots mark a deliberate rhythm. He noticed how each step left a small impression, delicate and fleeting, yet perfectly his own, a reminder that every action, however small, left a trace in the world. School moved forward in its usual rhythm, but Morty's awareness had deepened. He observed the subtleties of others' moods, the way a classmate's shoulders tightened when worried, or how another's fingers drummed lightly on a desk when restless. Morty no longer rushed to fix or comment. He simply noticed and held space, allowing others' emotions to exist without judgment or interference. In these quiet attentions, he began to understand a new kind of strength, one that was gentle yet profound. The power to see, to recognize, and to honor the inner lives of others, he realized, could shape the world more deeply than any loud act. After school, Morty wandered again into the snowy woods, the landscape transformed into a realm of quiet brilliance. The pond at the edge reflected the pale winter light like a mirror polished by time, and the trees stood in solemn frost-tipped rows, their branches delicate under the weight of snow. Morty knelt at the pond's edge, brushing his fingers across its icy surface. A faint ripple shivered outward, and he felt it resonate gently, as though the pond acknowledged his presence in its quiet way. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the woods, the wind through the branches, the distant call of a bird, the soft scuttle of small creatures hidden beneath the snow. In these sounds he perceived a subtle continuity, a quiet pulse that spoke of life persisting with gentle patience, unseen yet unbroken. One afternoon, Morty discovered a small hollow beneath a frost-covered oak, where the earth was soft and warm beneath the snow. He pressed his hands lightly to the ground, feeling faint vibrations that spoke of hidden life, of subtle movements beneath the frozen surface. It was a reminder that beneath stillness, activity and growth continued, quietly and deliberately, in ways that were not immediately visible. Morty understood that attention, patience, and gentle observation were the keys to perceiving these hidden rhythms, and he allowed himself to sink fully into the experience, feeling a connection to forces far larger than himself, subtle yet persistent, like an unseen tide shaping the shore. Evenings were longer now, spent in quiet reflection by his window. Morty arranged frost-touched leaves, pine cones, and small stones collected throughout the day, alongside the treasures he had gathered in previous seasons. Each item held memory, awareness, and subtle resonance, forming a constellation of experiences that reminded him of the soft, persistent threads connecting everything he had encountered: the boy from school, the small bird, the pond, the hidden paths in the woods, and even the faint, persistent hum of unseen life beneath the snow. The stars above appeared gradually, blinking faintly through the clear winter sky, and Morty felt the threads of connection between himself, the earth, and the sky pulsing gently in his awareness. One evening, as the first full moon of winter rose, Morty lingered outside in the soft light, letting the frost glinting across the landscape catch his eyes. He thought of the boy who shared his silent attentions, of the small creatures that scuttled beneath the snow, and of the pond that mirrored the sky's pale luminescence. Each memory pulsed in him like a soft rhythm, quiet but persistent, a gentle call to continue cultivating awareness, empathy, and patience. He began to sense that these threads were not limited to the familiar spaces of his neighborhood or the woods he loved, but extended outward, touching realms he could not yet perceive, hinting at possibilities beyond the ordinary, yet not distant, somehow waiting for him to notice. As sleep approached, Morty returned to his room, letting the quiet hum of attention settle over him like a warm cloak. He traced constellations on the frosted window, imagining invisible threads weaving through, the sky connecting everything he had seen and felt. There was no urgency, no demand, only a steady, patient rhythm that assured him that the quiet practices he cultivated each day were preparing him for discoveries yet to come. And as he let his breath deepen and his body sink into the covers, Morty exhaled fully, carrying a tender understanding that growth, perception, and connection unfolded slowly, deliberately, and gently. The universe, he felt, would continue to whisper its secrets, and he would continue to listen, always attentively, always softly, trusting the unseen currents to guide him toward experiences and understanding just beyond the familiar. Winter had begun to yield gently to early whispers of spring, and Morty felt the subtle shift in the air even before the first crocuses dared to peek through the melting snow. The mornings were crisper still, but hints of warmth threaded through the sun's pale rays, casting long, slow patterns across streets and forest paths. Morty walked with quiet attentiveness, noticing the way droplets of thawing frost clung to branches, refracting light in tiny prisms, and the faint scent of earth awakening beneath the lingering snow. Each detail, fleeting and small, seemed to hum with life, and he felt, with deepening certainty, that every observation, no matter how quiet, carried its own subtle significance. At school, Morty had become increasingly aware of the small rhythms in the lives around him. He noticed when a classmate's energy waned, the faint drag of steps, or the way a gaze flickered to a notebook, trying to hold back a worry or thought. He responded with a gentle attentiveness that required no words, an acknowledgement in his posture, a quiet patience that communicated understanding without intrusion. Others began to sense the calm steadiness he offered, and even without noticing it consciously, they leaned into it, comforted by his presence. Morty began to realize that listening and noticing were forms of quiet courage, ways to create space for connection that did not demand but rather invited openness and trust. After school, he wandered into the woods once more, drawn to the familiar paths that had become extensions of his own consciousness. The pond at the edge reflected the sky, now streaked with tender colors of early evening, and the trees, shedding their frost-covered branches, seemed to stretch in silent acknowledgement of his presence. Morty knelt at the water's edge, tracing delicate patterns in its surface with his fingertips. Each ripple radiated outward, subtle yet precise, and he felt a faint resonance that seemed to echo beyond the pond into the hidden currents flowing through earth, air, and sky. In these moments, Morty realized that observation itself could be a gentle form of participation, a way of harmonizing with life's quiet rhythms without imposing upon them. One afternoon, Morty discovered a narrow trail that had been concealed by winter's snow, leading deeper into the woods than he had ventured before. He followed it slowly, mindful of every sound and movement, the soft creak of a branch under a small animal's weight, the rustle of leaves in a tentative breeze, the faint sparkle of water droplets caught in light. The trail opened into a small clearing, dappled with sunlight and scattered wildflowers just beginning to emerge from the thaw. Morty paused, breathing deeply, feeling the quiet pulse of life around him, as if the clearing itself had waited patiently for him to arrive. Here he understood more clearly than ever that growth and change were not always loud or abrupt. They could be subtle, patient, and beautiful in their soft persistence. Evenings carried the same quiet reflection. Morty returned home with small tokens of the day, twigs, tiny flowers, stones, and leaves, placing them carefully on his windowsill among the treasures he had gathered throughout the seasons. Each item held memory and subtle meaning, forming a constellation of small truths that anchored him to the rhythm of the world. As night fell and stars began to appear one by one in the deepening sky, Morty traced invisible threads connecting all these moments. The boy from school, the small bird, the pond, the hidden trail, the clearing, and the soft pulse of life within himself. The threads pulsed quietly, imperceptibly, but persistently, creating a sense of continuity and trust that carried him gently forward. One evening, as twilight bled into night and the sky deepened to indigo, Morty lingered outside, feeling the soft warmth of the returning sun mixed with the chill lingering from winter. He thought of all he had seen, all he had noticed, all the small threads connecting beings, places, and moments in a tapestry of quiet life. Each memory, each sensation seemed to resonate with something larger, stretching beyond the bounds of his familiar world. he began to sense that the subtle attentiveness he had been practicing was not only preparing him to perceive these connections, but also opening him to a broader awareness, a readiness to encounter experiences that extended beyond the ordinary, beyond the visible, into realms that hummed quietly just beyond perception. As night approached, Morty returned to his room, allowing the quiet hum of awareness to settle over him like a gentle embrace. He traced patterns of constellations on the window pane, imagining invisible currents weaving through sky and earth alike. Sleep gathered around him softly, carrying the tender reassurance that growth, perception, and connection unfolded in patient rhythms, and that the subtle threads he had nurtured daily would guide him toward experiences yet unseen. And as he exhaled fully, surrendering to rest, Morty felt a quiet certainty. The universe, patient and vast, would continue to whisper its secret, and he would continue to listen, always gently, always attentively, ready for the soft unfolding of mysteries awaiting just beyond the familiar. Spring had settled gently over the town, carrying a soft, almost imperceptible warmth that nudged life back into motion. The snow had fully receded, revealing the tender green of grass, the first blooms of early flowers, and the glimmer of damp earth awakening beneath sunlight. Morty stepped outside one morning and felt the world inhale alongside him. The crispness of the air still there, but softened, imbued with promise. Every leaf, every petal seemed to hum quietly with possibility, and he moved among them slowly, letting each sensation imprint itself in his awareness. The world felt alive in ways that were subtle, persistent, inviting him to notice and to honor its patient rhythms. At school, the change in season mirrored subtle shifts in interactions. Morty noticed how classmates moved with renewed energy, how laughter emerged more easily, and how small acts of care, sharing pencils, offering a smile, or helping someone retrieve a fallen book, carried a new significance. Morty responded as always with quiet attentiveness, not demanding recognition, simply observing, understanding, and participating in these small exchanges of empathy. He began to feel the threads connecting all these lives with increasing clarity, recognizing that the world was composed not only of actions and words, but of these silent currents of care, patience, and understanding. After school, he wandered into the woods where spring had begun to brush each branch with delicate life. The pond at the far edge mirrored the sky, now streaked with soft pastels, and the ice had vanished entirely, leaving water that rippled gently under the caress of wind. Morty knelt at its edge, letting his fingers touch the surface, feeling the subtle vibrations radiate outward. He listened to the small sounds around him, the call of a returning bird, the faint rustle of leaves as new buds unfurled, the scurry of tiny creatures in the underbrush. All of it, he realized, was part of the same quiet current, a subtle rhythm connecting earth, water, sky, and life itself. One afternoon, as he ventured along a narrow path that had once been hidden beneath winter's snow, Morty discovered a sun-dappled glade he had never noticed before. Wildflowers, tentative and brave, pushed through the softening soil, their colors tender and vivid. The branches above swayed slowly in the breeze, and the scent of fresh earth rose to meet him like a whispered greeting. Morty knelt among the flowers, letting his hands trace the textures of petals and leaves, feeling the gentle pulse of growth beneath his fingertips. Here, in this quiet sanctuary, he understood the persistence of life, the patient unfolding of possibility, and the tender insistence of existence, all moving steadily forward, even in places unseen. Evenings were spent in reflection by his window, arranging fresh tokens from the day among the growing collection of leaves, stones, twigs, and acorns he had gathered over the seasons. Each object held memory, subtle resonance, and a quiet affirmation of life's continuity. The stars appeared faintly in the deepening sky, and Morty traced invisible threads connecting all these moments: the boy from school, the bird in the woods, the pond, the hidden trail, the glade, and the small vibrations of life beneath his notice. Each thread pulsed with quiet energy, a reminder that connection did not demand loud actions but existed in the attentiveness, care, and patience that he had been cultivating steadily. One evening, as twilight deepened and the first fireflies appeared, flickering like tiny lanterns in the gathering darkness, Morty paused to watch them drift through the glade. He thought of all the small moments that had brought him here, the silent gestures of others, the careful attention to nature's subtleties, the growing awareness of hidden rhythms that connected beings, places, and experiences. These threads, he realized, extended beyond the familiar touching realms he could not yet perceive, hinting at a larger, subtler reality, waiting quietly, patiently, for him to notice. As night approached, Morty returned to his room, letting the gentle hum of awareness settle over him. He traced constellations faintly visible on the window pane, imagining invisible currents weaving through sky, earth, and all the living things between. Sleep arrived like a gentle tide, carrying the reassurance that growth, empathy, and attention unfolded naturally, steadily, and without urgency. And as he exhaled fully beneath his covers, Morty surrendered to rest, carrying the quiet understanding that the soft threads of life he had nurtured would guide him patiently toward the experiences and mysteries yet unseen, gently preparing him for the unfolding of the larger worlds awaiting just beyond the familiar. The warmth of late spring spread slowly over the town, and with it came a delicate sense of awakening. Morty walked along familiar streets and paths, noticing how shadows had softened, how the breeze carried the scent of new blooms, and how sunlight lingered longer in the afternoon sky. Each step seemed to echo with the rhythm of life returning, and he allowed himself to move slowly, letting the smallest details, the rustle of leaves, the gentle hum of insects, the distant laughter of children, imprint themselves fully upon his senses. There was a subtle joy in noticing, in being present, that filled him quietly, without fanfare, but deeply enough to steady the pulse of his own awareness. At school, Morty's attentiveness continued to shape his experiences. He observed not only the overt actions of his classmates, but the invisible currents that moved between them, the tension in a friend's voice when speaking, the hesitation in another's glance, or the quiet need for reassurance in someone's posture. Morty's responses remained understated, a nod, a patient listening, a small act of acknowledgement, but they carried weight. Others, without naming it, leaned into his presence, comforted by the quiet constancy he offered. He began to sense that understanding the invisible threads connecting people was a gift, a form of quiet heroism that did not seek reward or recognition, but quietly shaped the world in subtle, meaningful ways. After school, Morty wandered into the woods, where spring's growth was no longer tentative, but confident, swelling in leaves, flowers, and hidden life beneath the soil. The pond, free of ice and gleaming in the afternoon light, reflected the movement of clouds overhead and the occasional darting flight of a bird. Morty knelt at its edge, letting his fingers touch the rippling water, feeling the faint vibrations that seemed to echo beyond the pond itself. He listened to the forest with careful attention, the whisper of wind through branches, the soft chirping of insects, the quiet movement of creatures hidden in underbrush. These small sounds, he realized, were not random, but part of a subtle current, an underlying rhythm that connected earth, water, sky, and life in a seamless, gentle dance. One afternoon, as he explored a path leading deeper into the woods than he had gone before, Morty came upon a small grove, sunlight filtering through young leaves to touch the soft ground. Tiny wildflowers peeked shyly through the earth, their colors vivid against the muted browns and greens of the soil. Morty knelt among them, brushing his hands over petals and leaves, feeling the quiet persistence of life. In that grove, he understood that growth was not always loud or obvious. Life's steady unfolding, often unnoticed, carried its own profound rhythm, a gentle insistence that even in moments of stillness or apparent quiet, the world moved toward its own subtle perfection. Evenings continued to invite reflection. Morty returned home with small treasures from the day: twigs, tiny blooms, pebbles warmed by sunlight, and feathers he had found along the trail. He arranged them carefully alongside the collection he had amassed over the seasons, each object representing memory, attention, and a quiet acknowledgement of the patterns of life he had witnessed. The stars began to twinkle faintly above, and Morty traced imagined threads connecting all these experiences: the boy from school, the bird in the woods, the pond, the hidden grove, and the pulse of life itself. Each thread seemed to hum softly, creating a gentle tapestry of connection that reassured him of continuity, care, and the subtle guidance of unseen forces. One evening, as twilight deepened and the first fireflies of the season appeared, Morty lingered in the grove, watching their slow, deliberate glow. Each flicker of light seemed to mirror the subtle moments he had noticed over the months, small illuminations in the quiet fabric of the world. He thought of the invisible currents linking beings, places, and moments, sensing that these threads stretched beyond the familiar, extending into realms he could not yet perceive. There was no rush or urgency, only a soft invitation to remain attentive, patient, and open, allowing awareness to deepen steadily and without pressure. As night approached, Morty returned to his room, letting the soft hum of perception settle around him like a warm, comforting cloak. He traced patterns of stars on the window pane, imagining the invisible currents weaving through sky, earth, and life in a vast, gentle web. Sleep arrived slowly, carrying the quiet assurance that the attentiveness, patience, and empathy he had cultivated each day would guide him gently toward experiences yet unseen, and toward the soft unfolding of mysteries waiting quietly beyond the familiar. And as he exhaled fully beneath his covers, Morty surrendered to rest, holding the quiet understanding that life, in all its subtle complexity, would continue to whisper its secrets, and he would continue to listen, softly, attentively, and with care. The heat of early summer began to settle over the town with a gentle insistence, wrapping the streets, the woods, and the pond in a warm, drowsy light. Morty walked slowly beneath the canopy of tall trees, feeling the sun weave golden threads through leaves and onto the soft earth beneath his feet. The air carried the faint scent of grass, flowers, and sun-warmed soil, and every step seemed to hum with quiet vitality. Morty let his awareness stretch, soft and steady, noticing the smallest details: the curve of a leaf's edge, the faint shimmer of water at the pond's margin, the distant buzz of insects moving in unhurried patterns. Each detail felt like a subtle pulse, a heartbeat of life that invited him to move in rhythm with it. School felt lighter in the warmth, though not without its subtle complexities. Morty noticed the shifts in mood among classmates, the way energy rose and fell in quiet waves, how small gestures carried unspoken meaning, how laughter and silence wove together to form invisible bonds. He continued to offer his presence without expectation or interference, a patient observer and gentle participant. In this quiet attentiveness, he began to feel a deepening trust in the subtle currents that connected people. The realization settled softly in him that understanding and empathy, cultivated steadily over time, could shape the world in ways that were invisible yet enduring. After school, he wandered into the woods where summer's warmth had coaxed life into vivid, confident growth. The pond glimmered in sunlight, reflecting clouds drifting lazily across the sky. Morty knelt at its edge, brushing his fingers lightly over the rippling surface, sensing faint vibrations that seemed to echo beyond the visible water. He listened to the forest with careful attentiveness, the rustle of leaves stirred by a breeze, the chirp of a bird hidden among branches, the faint movement of animals in the undergrowth. All of it existed in a delicate balance, a subtle rhythm that connected every living thing. Morty felt a quiet exhilaration in being able to perceive it, a gentle understanding that his attentiveness was itself a form of participation in this greater, unseen flow. One afternoon, following a trail previously hidden by the summer undergrowth, Morty discovered a secluded glen bathed in sunlight. The air was thick with the scent of blooming wildflowers, and tiny bees moved deliberately from blossom to blossom. Morty crouched among the flowers, letting his hands brush against petals and soft leaves. He felt the quiet insistence of life, persistent and patient, unfolding in ways that required neither notice nor applause. In that glen, Morty understood more profoundly than ever that growth, care, and connection often unfolded quietly, beneath the surface of attention. Yet their impact was subtle and enduring. Evenings became moments of reflection and gentle curiosity. Morty returned home with small tokens of his explorations: a feather, a smooth stone, a delicate flower pressed carefully between pages of his notebook. Each item was a reminder of the hidden currents he had observed, the invisible threads linking creatures, spaces, and moments in an intricate tapestry of life. As dusk deepened, he traced invisible connections in his mind: the boy from school, the bird, the pond, the hidden glen, and the pulse of life in every quiet observation. Each thread seemed to pulse faintly, a steady rhythm of presence, patience, and care. One evening, as the sun set and fireflies began to flicker across the glen, Morty paused to watch their deliberate, patient light. He thought of the months that had passed, the attentive observation of winter, the thawing clarity of spring, and now the fullness of summer's warmth. Each season had taught him subtle lessons: the persistence of life, the quiet power of empathy, and the patient unfolding of connection. He felt with increasing certainty that these threads extended beyond his immediate perception, touching realms unseen and experiences waiting quietly, patiently, just beyond the familiar. As night approached, Morty returned to his room, letting the gentle hum of awareness settle over him like a soft cloak. He traced patterns on the window pane, imagining invisible currents weaving through sky, earth, and all the living threads he had touched and observed. Sleep arrived slowly, carrying the quiet reassurance that the attentiveness, patience, and empathy he had cultivated over months would continue to guide him toward experiences yet unseen. And as he exhaled beneath the covers, Morty surrendered fully, holding the quiet understanding that the universe, patient and vast, would whisper its secrets in time, and he would continue to listen, softly, attentively, and with care, ready for the gentle unfolding of the multiverse awaiting just beyond the familiar. The first hints of late summer evenings lingered longer in the sky, stretching the day into gentle golds and muted blues. Morty wandered slowly along the familiar paths of the woods, feeling the warmth of the sun fade softly, leaving a quiet comfort in its wake. The air carried the mingled scents of sun-baked earth and the lingering sweetness of blossoms, and every step seemed to resonate with the subtle hum of life. He noticed the small details, the way a leaf trembled as a breeze passed, the distant hum of a hidden insect, the soft ripple of the pond reflecting the slow drift of clouds. Each observation became a quiet anchor, a way to steady his own awareness, in harmony with the world around him. At school, Morty had grown more attuned to the invisible rhythms among his classmates. He noticed how someone's hesitation revealed an unspoken thought, how a flicker of a smile hinted at a tiny relief, or how subtle gestures carried empathy that went unnoticed. He continued to offer his quiet presence, his attentiveness, a soft reassurance without intrusion. Morty began to understand that patience and observation were forms of connection as profound as words or action. By simply noticing and being present, he could affirm the existence of others, creating a gentle network of understanding that threaded invisibly through his daily life. After school, Morty returned to the woods where late summer had imbued every branch and leaf with a deepening richness. The pond mirrored the sky, now painted with streaks of orange and violet as the sun leaned toward the horizon. Morty knelt by its edge, letting his fingers brush lightly across the water, feeling ripples radiate outward, delicate yet perceptible. He listened intently to the forest, the low murmur of leaves, the chirp of birds settling for the evening, the faint scuttle of creatures beneath the underbrush. Each sound carried a subtle message, a rhythm that tied all life together, and Morty felt a profound sense of belonging in recognizing these hidden currents. Exploring a winding path that had been revealed by the thinning foliage, Morty discovered a small, sunlit clearing framed by tall oak. Tiny flowers glimmered in the soft light, and insects moved deliberately, almost ceremoniously among them. Morty crouched, letting his hands trace the textures of petals and leaves, feeling the quiet insistence of life unfolding without notice. Here, in this serene enclosure, he realized that growth and connection often progressed silently, like a hidden river beneath visible ground. The steady patience of the natural world mirrored the rhythms he had been cultivating within himself. Attentiveness, care, and quiet understanding, all of which were preparing him for something just beyond the ordinary. Evenings became a ritual of gentle reflection. Morty carried small tokens home from his explorations, smooth stones, delicate blooms, feathers, and twigs. He arranged them alongside his growing collection, each representing memory, observation, and subtle acknowledgement of life's intricate patterns. As twilight deepened, Morty imagined invisible threads connecting all the elements of his days. The boy from school, the bird, the pond, the glade, the tiny ripple of creatures beneath his notice. These threads pulsed softly in his awareness, creating a tapestry of quiet energy that reassured him of connection, continuity, and the gentle guidance of unseen forces. One evening, as fireflies began to appear, their slow flickers of light like tiny lanterns, Morty paused in the clearing. He thought of the months that had passed, each season teaching him subtle lessons, the patient unfolding of winter, the awakening of spring, the vibrant persistence of summer. Each observation, each attentive moment had tuned him to rhythms that extended beyond the ordinary, touching realms yet unseen. Morty sensed, more clearly than ever, that these threads reached outward, beyond the familiar woods and streets, hinting at experiences and dimensions waiting quietly for him to perceive them. Night approached, and Morty returned to his room, carrying the soft hum of awareness with him. He traced constellations faintly visible on the window pane, imagining invisible currents weaving through sky, earth, and all the living threads he had touched. Sleep gathered around him slowly, like a gentle tide, carrying the assurance that the patience, attentiveness, and empathy he had nurtured would continue to guide him toward the experiences yet to come. And as he exhaled beneath the covers, Morty surrendered fully to rest, holding the quiet understanding that the universe, vast and patient, would whisper its secrets in time, and he would continue to listen, softly, attentively, and with care, ready for the subtle unfolding of the worlds awaiting just beyond the familiar. The late summer evenings grew longer and softer, stretching the sky into gentle bands of peach, lavender, and fading gold. Morty wandered slowly along the familiar paths, feeling the warmth of the day melt into the cool, comforting embrace of night. Each step carried a quiet rhythm, the soft rustle of leaves beneath his feet harmonizing with the distant chirp of cicadas and the faint whisper of a breeze through the trees. Morty noticed the small details with tender attentiveness, the curve of a twig, the glint of sunlight on a dewdrop, the way shadows stretched and folded in delicate patterns. Each observation anchored him in the present, a gentle meditation on the world's persistent, subtle pulse. School continued its quiet hum of routines, yet Morty had begun to perceive the invisible currents flowing between people. He noticed the way one friend's glance lingered longer than usual, how another's breath hitched in silent apprehension, the almost imperceptible tremor of a smile attempting to mask worry. Morty's attentiveness remained quiet, his presence a soft reassurance. He began to recognize that understanding and empathizing did not require words or grand gestures. Simply being present and observing gently was a form of care, an unseen act of connection. The rhythm of these small acts, when practiced patiently, wove a subtle network of understanding and trust that reached further than he had once imagined. After school, he ventured into the woods, now alive with the richness of late summer. The pond reflected the sky's fading light, rippling softly as a gentle breeze moved across its surface. Morty knelt at the edge, letting his fingers skim the water, feeling tiny vibrations radiate outward, connecting everything he observed. He listened to the forest intently, the soft hum of insects, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the whisper of leaves overhead. Every movement seemed to carry purpose, a quiet language of existence that Morty had begun to decipher through patient attention. He realized that the smallest gestures of life were part of a vast, interconnected rhythm, and that his awareness could participate in that flow without intrusion or force. One afternoon, following a path that had revealed itself through the thickened summer undergrowth, Morty discovered a small, sunlit clearing hidden like a secret. Wildflowers glowed faintly, their colors vivid against the deep green of moss and grass, and insects moved deliberately among them. Morty crouched, brushing his fingers across petals and leaves, feeling the soft insistence of life unfolding quietly, resiliently, without need for recognition. The grove seemed to acknowledge him, a private sanctuary where the gentle pulse of growth and connection could be felt deeply. Here, Morty understood that much of life's power was subtle, invisible to those who did not stop to observe, yet immense in its capacity to shape and sustain the world. Evenings became a time for reflection and quiet ritual. Morty returned home with small treasures, pebbles smoothed by the pond, leaves with delicate patterns, tiny flowers, and a feather that caught the fading sun. He arranged them among his growing collection, each object holding memory, awareness, and the echo of life's intricate rhythms. As night fell and stars blinked faintly into existence, he traced invisible threads connecting all his experiences: the boy from school, the pond, the hidden grove, the subtle pulse of the earth, and the quiet currents he had cultivated within himself. These threads pulsed softly, a gentle tapestry of connection that reassured him of continuity, care, and the hidden guidance of the universe. One evening, as twilight deepened and fireflies danced in deliberate arcs across the clearing, Morty paused to watch. Each flicker of light mirrored the small, patient observations he had collected over months: the unseen ripples, the tiny gestures, the quiet persistence of life. He thought of all the threads linking beings, places, and moments, and sensed that these connections extended beyond the familiar woods and streets, reaching into realms he had not yet perceived. There was no urgency, no demand, only the patient invitation to continue noticing, listening, and being present. Morty understood that his awareness was slowly tuning him to possibilities beyond the ordinary, gently preparing him for experiences awaiting just beyond the visible, tangible world. As night approached fully, Morty returned to his room, carrying with him the soft hum of perception that had accompanied him all day. He traced constellations on the window pane, imagining the invisible currents weaving through sky, earth, and life alike. Sleep gathered around him slowly, like a tide that crept in with patience, carrying the reassurance that his attentiveness, empathy, and quiet care would guide him toward experiences yet unseen. And as he exhaled beneath his covers, Morty surrendered completely, holding the soft understanding that the universe, patient and vast, would continue to whisper its secrets, and he would continue to listen, softly, attentively, and with care, ready for the gentle unfolding of the worlds beyond the familiar. The first hints of autumn began to stir in the air, gentle and almost imperceptible, like a quiet sigh across the town. Leaves carried faint tinges of gold and amber along the edges, and the sunlight itself seemed warmer, more deliberate, lingering longer on the branches and the soft earth below. Morty walked slowly through the woods, noticing the subtle changes, the rustle of leaves shifting in the wind, the scent of fallen foliage mixed with the lingering sweetness of summer blooms, the faint shimmer of dew in shaded patches. Each step felt like a conversation with the world, a silent acknowledgement of the slow, patient turning of the seasons, and Morty moved with care, letting every sound, smell, and texture settle gently into his awareness. At school, the world of human interaction continued to reveal its quiet patterns. Morty noticed the way emotions often moved invisibly between people, the fleeting hesitation in a friend's glance, the soft tremor in someone's voice, the subtle way gestures carried unspoken support. His own attentiveness remained unobtrusive, yet powerful in its simplicity. Morty understood more clearly now that true connection did not need announcement or recognition. It existed in the small, patient acts of observation, empathy, and presence. He began to sense that the rhythm of understanding between beings was like a quiet river, flowing beneath the surface, shaping life subtly yet irrevocably. After school, Morty wandered to the familiar pond in the woods, which now mirrored the rich hues of the sky as the sun sank lower. The water's surface shimmered with gentle ripples, disturbed occasionally by a passing breeze or a small insect brushing the surface. Morty knelt at the edge, letting his fingers trail lightly through the water, feeling the faint vibration. That connected everything he observed. The forest around him seemed alive in a quiet, deliberate way. The creak of tree branches, the soft rustle of unseen creatures, the muted hum of insects in the undergrowth. Each sound was a note in a vast, subtle symphony of life, and Morty realized that his patient attention allowed him to become part of this melody, moving in harmony without force or disruption, exploring a winding path that had revealed itself. More clearly, with the thinning summer undergrowth, Morty discovered a small clearing he had not noticed before. Sunlight spilled gently across the ground, illuminating delicate wildflowers whose petals seemed almost translucent. Insects moved, slowly and deliberately among them, each carrying out their work with patient intent. Morty crouched among the blooms, letting his hands brush across the soft textures of petals and leaves, feeling the quiet insistence of life unfolding with no need for recognition or applause. He understood, more deeply than ever, that the power of life was often invisible, yet immense in its persistence and subtle influence. Evenings became moments of meditation and gentle ritual. Morty returned home with tokens from his wanderings: fallen leaves patterned with gold veins, small stones smoothed by sunlight and rain, tiny blooms preserved in notebooks. Each item was a quiet reminder of the threads of life he had witnessed: the boy from school, the pond, the hidden groves, and the delicate currents flowing between all living things. As night approached and stars blinked faintly into view, he traced imagined connections weaving through the world, sensing a soft rhythm that tied together beings, spaces, and moments into a tapestry of gentle continuity. One evening, as twilight deepened and the first fireflies began their deliberate dance, Morty paused in the clearing, watching them flicker slowly across the shadows. He thought of the months that had passed, of the patient unfolding of winter, spring, and summer, and of the quiet lessons each season had imparted: persistence, attentiveness, and the power of subtle connection. He sensed, with increasing clarity, that these invisible threads stretched far beyond the woods and streets he knew, reaching into realms yet unseen, guiding him gently toward experiences waiting quietly just beyond the familiar. Night gathered fully, and Morty returned to his room, carrying the hum of awareness like a soft cloak. He traced constellations faintly visible on the window pane, imagining the invisible currents weaving through sky, earth, and all the living threads he had touched. Sleep arrived slowly, like a tide that rose with patient persistence, carrying the quiet reassurance that his attentiveness, care, and empathy would continue to guide him toward experiences yet to be encountered. And as he exhaled beneath the covers, Morty surrendered fully to rest, understanding gently that the universe, patient and vast, would whisper its secrets in time, and he would continue to listen, softly, attentively, and with care, ready for the gentle unfolding of the worlds awaiting just beyond the familiar. The days had grown cooler, the first real hints of autumn settling into the air, crisp and clear, carrying with them the scent of fallen leaves and distant rain. Morty wandered slowly along the familiar paths in the woods, noticing how the colors had deepened, how every leaf seemed to carry a story, and how shadows stretched longer with the waning sun. The soft rustle of trees overhead, the distant caw of a crow, and the faint hum of insects hiding among the underbrush composed a quiet symphony that filled the spaces between thought and awareness. Morty moved with patient attention, allowing every sound, scent, and subtle motion to become part of a gentle meditation, letting himself feel both the smallness and the vastness of the world at once. School had taken on a rhythm of its own, familiar yet layered with subtle currents he had only begun to perceive. Morty noticed the invisible interplay of emotions and unspoken gestures, the quiet hesitation in a friend's voice, the small, fleeting nod of acknowledgement exchanged across a classroom, the soft tremor of a laugh meant to hide uncertainty. His own presence, calm and observant, became a quiet anchor for those around him. Morty realized that empathy was not always spoken aloud. Often it existed in the quiet patience of noticing, in the gentle acknowledgement that life's smallest moments, unnoticed by most, could carry the deepest significance. After the school day, Morty found himself drawn to the pond, where the water reflected the rich, muted colors of the autumn sky. He knelt at its edge, letting his fingers trail lightly through the surface, feeling the tiny vibrations ripple outward and touch the world around him. He listened attentively to the forest, the low rustle of leaves, the distant chirp of settling birds, the scuttle of hidden creatures, and sensed that each motion and sound was part of a larger, intricate rhythm. Morty felt a quiet exhilaration in being able to perceive these currents, understanding that his awareness itself became a subtle participation in the life of the woods. Exploring a twisting path that had become clearer with the thinning canopy, Morty came upon a secluded glade, touched by soft golden light filtering through the trees. The air carried a faint chill, but the space felt warm, safe, and alive. Tiny wildflowers and early fallen leaves created a carpet of color beneath the towering oaks. Morty crouched to examine the delicate patterns of petals and leaves, noticing the persistence of life even in moments of quiet decay. He understood that the power of existence often unfolded in subtle, invisible ways, persistent and patient, and that these small, unnoticed threads were what held the world together. Evenings became a time of quiet reflection, a gentle ritual. Morty returned home with small treasures from his wanderings, pebbles, fallen leaves, feathers, and flowers, arranging them carefully among his collection. Each object represented a memory, a subtle observation, and the ongoing rhythm of life's intricate patterns. As twilight deepened and stars began to twinkle faintly in the clear autumn sky, Morty traced the invisible threads connecting all that he had seen. The boy from school, the pond, the glade, the currents of life flowing through, the forest, and the gentle persistence of unseen forces. These threads pulsed quietly, forming a tapestry of connection and continuity that reassured him of the gentle guidance inherent in the universe. One evening, as fireflies flickered like tiny lanterns in the glade, Morty paused to watch them, their deliberate movements mirrored in the rhythm of his own patient awareness. He thought of the months that had passed, each season teaching him lessons in quiet resilience, attentiveness, and empathy. He sensed that these invisible threads extended far beyond the woods, beyond the familiar streets, reaching into realms yet unseen. There was no urgency, only the patient invitation to continue noticing, listening, and participating in the rhythm of life. Morty understood that his awareness was slowly attuning him to a world beyond the ordinary, preparing him gently for experiences that waited quietly just out of reach. As night approached, Morty returned to his room, carrying the soft hum of presence with him. He traced constellations on the window pane, imagining invisible currents weaving through sky, earth, and all the living threads he had encountered. Sleep arrived slowly, like a tide that rose with gentle insistence, carrying with it the reassurance that his patience, attention, and empathy would continue to guide him toward experiences yet to unfold. And as he exhaled beneath the covers, Morty surrendered completely to rest, feeling the quiet understanding that the universe, patient and vast, would whisper its secrets in time, and he would continue to listen softly, attentively, and with care, ready for the gentle unfolding of worlds beyond the familiar. The air had grown noticeably cooler, carrying the crispness of approaching autumn and the faint scent of fallen leaves. Morty wandered slowly along the winding paths of the woods, each step a soft punctuation in the quiet rhythm of evening. The forest seemed alive in a subtler way than before. Every leaf, every branch, and every hidden creature moved with a deliberate patience that mirrored his own unfolding awareness. Sunlight filtered through the thinning canopy, casting long, gentle shadows across the forest floor, and Morty noticed the intricate patterns it created, the fleeting moments of light and dark, dancing in quiet harmony. Each observation, each gentle note of awareness anchored him in a meditative present, as if the woods themselves were teaching him to listen deeply. At school, the currents of human interaction became increasingly clear to Morty. He observed how subtle gestures could carry unspoken meaning, how a fleeting glance or a barely audible sigh revealed an entire world of thought and feeling. Morty's presence remained soft and unobtrusive, yet it radiated a quiet attentiveness that others seemed to sense without knowing why. He understood more fully than ever that empathy was not about speaking loudly or acting heroically, but about noticing and honoring the presence of others. There was power in quiet observation, in patiently witnessing the ebb and flow of human emotion, in allowing someone to exist fully without interruption or judgment. After school, Morty returned to the familiar pond, now reflecting the muted tones of an early autumn sky. He knelt at the water's edge, letting his fingers trace delicate ripples across the surface. Each ripple felt like a whisper of connection, resonating beyond the pond and into the surrounding forest. The gentle hum of life around him, the rustle of leaves, the distant chirping of settling birds, the faint scurry of unseen creatures, formed a rhythm that Morty absorbed attentively. In that moment he realized that the act of noticing, of being fully present, created a subtle participation in the vast web of life, a gentle but profound acknowledgement of existence. Following a winding trail he had long ago discovered, Morty stumbled upon a secluded glade bathed in the soft amber light of late afternoon. Tiny flowers lingered among fallen leaves, their petals carrying traces of summer's warmth, and the forest exhaled a quiet, steady breath that seemed to welcome him. Morty crouched among the blooms, letting his hands trace the soft edges of petals and leaves, feeling the patient insistence of life unfolding without urgency or recognition. Here he understood more clearly than ever that the most powerful forces often worked silently, shaping the world in ways that went unnoticed but were no less profound. Each small gesture, each persistent movement contributed to a tapestry of connection that stretched far beyond his immediate perception. Evenings had become a ritual of reflection. Morty returned home carrying small treasures from his wanderings, delicate flowers, polished stones, feathers, and fallen leaves. He arranged them carefully among his collection, each representing memory, observation, and the gentle flow of life. As night fell and stars began to appear, he traced imagined threads linking all the elements of his world: the boy from school, the pond, the glade, the hidden currents of the forest, and the quiet rhythms of existence. These threads pulsed softly in his awareness, forming a tapestry of continuity and care, a reassurance that the subtle connections he had nurtured carried a quiet, persistent power. One evening, as twilight deepened and fireflies appeared like tiny lanterns in the clearing, Morty paused to watch them dance with deliberate grace. He thought of the months that had passed, of the patient lessons learned through winter, spring, summer, and now early autumn: resilience, attentiveness, and empathy. He sensed that the invisible threads he had been following extended far beyond. The woods and streets he knew, reaching into realms unseen, and experiences waiting patiently to be discovered. There was no rush, only an invitation to continue noticing, listening, and participating fully in the rhythm of life. Morty felt a quiet certainty that his awareness was preparing him for encounters and dimensions he had yet to perceive, gently attuning him to the subtle patterns of the universe. As night gathered fully, Morty returned to his room, carrying the soft hum of presence like a cloak around his shoulders. He traced constellations faintly visible on the window pane, imagining the invisible currents weaving through sky, earth, and all the living threads he had encountered. Sleep arrived slowly, rising like a patient tide, carrying reassurance that his empathy, attentiveness, and quiet care would continue to guide him toward experiences yet to unfold. And as he exhaled beneath the covers, Morty surrendered fully, feeling the gentle certainty that the universe, patient and vast, would whisper its secrets in time, and he would continue to listen, softly, attentively, and with care, ready for the gentle unfolding of worlds just beyond the familiar. The autumn air had deepened, carrying a gentle crispness that hinted at the approach of colder nights. Morty moved slowly along the winding forest paths, each step a quiet acknowledgement of the subtle changes around him. Leaves, tinged with amber, gold and faint crimson, shifted softly beneath his feet, their rustling a gentle accompaniment to the distant call of birds preparing for the season's change. He paused often, letting his senses drink in the details, the texture of bark under his fingertips, the scent of earth mingled with decaying foliage, the soft vibration of life that seemed to pulse invisibly through every branch and stone. Each moment became a meditation, a soft tuning of awareness to the rhythms of a world both familiar and quietly mysterious. At school, Morty's understanding of subtle human interaction had grown deeper. He noticed the small gestures carrying meaning, beyond words. The nervous shift of a friend's hands, a fleeting glance of relief, the quiet hesitation that suggested unspoken concern. His presence, calm and observant, became a quiet, stabilizing force, an invisible reassurance to those around him. Morty realized that empathy often existed in these unnoticed spaces, in the attentive observation of what others left unsaid. There was a steady, unspoken power in simply bearing witness to another's existence, in honoring their presence without interruption, and this understanding shaped his every action with delicate care. After school, Morty wandered to the familiar pond, now reflecting the soft, muted light of the early evening sky. Kneeling at the edge, he let his fingers glide across the water, feeling the faint ripples stretch outward, touching not only the surface, but the invisible currents beneath. Around him, the forest whispered softly, the rustle of leaves, the hum of insects preparing for night, the occasional scurry of a hidden creature, all movements harmonized into a quiet symphony that he could feel in his bones. Morty understood that his awareness allowed him to participate gently in the rhythm of the world, a subtle collaboration with life itself. Following a winding trail, Morty discovered a secluded glade touched by the last golden light of the fading day. The air carried a delicate chill, yet the space felt alive and welcoming, a quiet sanctuary. Wildflowers clung to life amid the fallen leaves, their colors muted but persistent. Morty crouched among them, letting his hands brush across petals and leaves, feeling the quiet insistence of existence unfolding without fanfare or recognition. Here he sensed the invisible threads that connected all living things, the subtle but unyielding persistence of life and the quiet power inherent in patience and attention. He understood that the forces shaping the world often worked silently, imperceptibly, yet they were no less profound for their quietude. Evenings had become a gentle ritual of reflection. Morty returned home with small tokens from his wanderings, leaves, patterned with veins like tiny rivers, polished stones, delicate flowers and feathers. Each object represented a memory, a careful observation, and the ongoing presence of life's intricate rhythms. As twilight deepened and the first stars appeared, he traced invisible threads connecting everything he had experienced: the boy from school, the pond, the hidden glade, and the subtle currents flowing through the forest. These threads pulsed, quietly in his awareness, forming a tapestry of connection, reassurance, and continuity that extended far beyond what he could see. One evening, as fireflies flickered in the clearing, their deliberate dance mirrored the rhythm of Morty's own. Patient attention. He reflected on the months that had passed and the lessons each season had imparted: persistence, attentiveness, and the quiet strength of empathy. He sensed that the invisible threads he had been following reached far beyond the woods, extending into realms yet unseen, hinting at experiences and dimensions waiting patiently for him to notice. There was no hurry, no urgency, only the patient invitation to continue observing, listening, and participating fully in the gentle rhythm of life. Morty understood with soft certainty that this awareness was gradually attuning him to possibilities just beyond the familiar, preparing him for encounters yet to come. Night fell fully, and Morty returned to his room, carrying with him the hum of presence he had cultivated. He traced constellations faintly visible on the window pane, imagining invisible currents weaving through sky, earth, and all the living threads he had touched. Sleep came slowly, rising like a gentle tide, carrying reassurance that his attentiveness, care, and quiet understanding would continue to guide him toward experiences yet to unfold. And as he exhaled beneath his covers, Morty surrendered fully, feeling the quiet certainty that the universe, patient and vast, would continue to whisper its secrets in time, and he would continue to listen, softly, attentively, and with care, ready for the gentle unfolding of worlds waiting just beyond the familiar. The wind carried a cooler edge now, brushing through the trees with a whisper of change, as if announcing the slow approach of deeper autumn. Morty walked along the winding forest paths with a steady, deliberate pace, each step pressing softly into the carpet of fallen leaves. The forest seemed to breathe around him, a gentle, expansive rhythm that invited observation rather than action. Sunlight filtered through the thinning canopy in thin, golden ribbons, falling across the moss and undergrowth in shifting patterns that moved imperceptibly with the wind. Morty paused often, letting the moment unfold, tracing the delicate lines of bark, the shimmer of dew on late-season blooms, and the faint vibration of life in the soil beneath him. Every detail felt significant, a quiet reminder that presence itself was a form of care. At school, Morty noticed the subtle interplay of gestures and expressions that carried unspoken meaning. The tilt of a head, a pause in a conversation, the way a hand lingered slightly on a desk, all of it suggested hidden currents of emotion. Morty had grown patient in his observation, understanding that empathy did not always need words or immediate action. Sometimes the simplest acknowledgement of another's presence, the quiet recognition that someone was seen, was the most profound support. He carried this awareness with him gently, moving through the hallways like a soft current of calm, quietly anchoring himself and those around him. After classes, Morty returned to the familiar pond, now reflecting the softer hues of the early evening sky. He knelt at the water's edge, allowing his fingers to brush its surface, sending subtle ripples outward that seemed to echo across the forest in an invisible rhythm. Around him, the forest murmured softly, the rustle of leaves, the occasional scuttle of a small creature, the distant call of a settling bird. Each sound, each movement became part of a subtle symphony in which Morty felt increasingly attuned. His presence in the moment, patient and receptive, allowed him to participate in this symphony, a quiet collaboration with the life that surrounded him. Following a winding trail through the deepening woods, Morty discovered a secluded glade he had not noticed before. It was touched by the last amber light of day, the air carrying a faint chill, and yet the glade felt alive and welcoming. Tiny flowers lingered among fallen leaves, their colors muted but persistent against the earthy tones of the forest floor. Morty crouched among the blooms, letting his hands brush across petals and leaves, sensing the quiet insistence of life unfolding without need for recognition or applause. In this soft moment, he realized that the threads connecting all living things were often invisible, yet immensely resilient. Life, he understood, persisted not because of attention or reward, but because of its own patient, unspoken determination. Evenings became a quiet time of ritual and reflection. Morty returned home with tokens from his wanderings, delicate flowers, polished stones, patterned leaves, and small feathers. Each object carried memory, observation, and the gentle rhythm of the world he had witnessed. As twilight deepened and the first stars began to glimmer, Morty traced the invisible threads connecting everything he had seen: the boy from school, the pond, the hidden glade, the quiet hum of the forest, and the subtle patterns of life unfolding. These threads pulsed softly in his awareness, weaving a tapestry of connection that reassured him of continuity and care, a quiet foundation for understanding the unseen currents of the world. One evening, as fireflies began their slow, deliberate dance across the glade, Morty paused to watch them, their flickering lights echoing the rhythm of his own patient attention. He reflected on the months that had passed and on the lessons each season had imparted: resilience, attentiveness, and the quiet strength of empathy. He sensed that these threads extended beyond the forest, stretching into realms yet unseen, inviting him to continue observing, listening, and participating fully in life's quiet rhythms. There was no urgency, only the soft certainty that his awareness was tuning him gently toward experiences waiting patiently just beyond the familiar. Night gathered around him fully, and Morty returned to his room, carrying the soft hum of presence like a comforting cloak. He traced constellations faintly visible through his window, imagining invisible currents weaving through the sky, earth, and the living threads he had observed. Sleep rose slowly like a patient tide, carrying the reassurance that his attentiveness, care, and empathy would continue to guide him toward experiences yet to unfold. And as he exhaled beneath his covers, Morty surrendered fully, feeling the quiet certainty that the universe, patient and vast, would whisper its secrets in time, and he would continue to listen, softly, attentively, and with care, ready for the gentle unfolding of worlds just beyond the familiar. The forest had grown quieter, as if settling into a deep, patient rhythm. Morty moved slowly along the winding paths, each step cushioned by layers of leaves that whispered softly underfoot. The air carried the crispness of approaching winter, a gentle chill that brushed his cheeks and tangled lightly in his hair. Sunlight filtered through the thinning branches in long, golden slivers, illuminating the forest floor in patches that shifted with the sway of the trees. Morty paused often, letting each detail imprint itself on his senses: the texture of bark, the subtle scent of damp earth, the faint hum of life that continued its patient persistence beneath the surface. Every observation was a quiet meditation, a soft conversation with the world that invited him to move with awareness rather than haste. School had become a landscape of human rhythm and nuance. Morty noticed the subtle currents of emotion weaving through conversations and glances, a friend's small hesitation, a fleeting smile, a nod that lingered slightly longer than necessary. Each gesture carried its own quiet weight. Morty's presence, steady and attentive, acted as a calm anchor, a gentle acknowledgement that allowed others to exist fully in their own space. He understood more than ever that empathy often required no words, no grand actions. Sometimes the most profound connections existed in the patient recognition of another's existence, the unspoken validation that one was seen, heard, and understood. After school, Morty wandered to the familiar pond, its surface now reflecting the muted amber of an autumn sky descending into twilight. Kneeling at the edge, he let his fingers trace gentle ripples across the water, feeling the subtle vibrations of the pond echo outward, touching the surrounding forest in invisible waves. The world around him whispered softly, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds settling for the night, the occasional movement of a hidden creature, and Morty absorbed it all with quiet attentiveness. He understood more fully than before that his presence in these moments, patient and aware, was a participation in the rhythm of life itself, a silent acknowledgement of the currents that moved unseen but persistently through every living thing. Following a narrow trail that wound deeper into the woods, Morty discovered a secluded glade bathed in the soft amber glow of late afternoon. The air carried a faint chill, yet the space radiated a quiet warmth. Tiny wildflowers clung to life among the fallen leaves, delicate and persistent against the earthy tones of the forest floor. Morty crouched among them, letting his hands brush softly across petals and leaves, sensing the silent insistence of life unfolding without need for notice or applause. In that quiet, he recognized the subtle but unbreakable threads connecting all living things, the way life persisted quietly, gently, often without recognition, yet profoundly shaping the world in its patient continuation. Evenings had become a gentle ritual, a time for reflection and quiet presence. Morty returned home with small treasures from his wanderings: feathers, patterned leaves, tiny stones, and the remnants of wildflowers. Each object represented observation, memory, and the rhythm of life he had witnessed. As twilight deepened and stars blinked faintly into view, he traced the invisible threads connecting all the elements he had encountered: the boy from school, the pond, the glade, and the quiet hum of the forest. These threads pulsed softly in his awareness, forming a tapestry of continuity, care, and subtle guidance, a reassurance that the small, patient acts of noticing and listening held their own quiet power. One evening, as fireflies began their slow, deliberate dance across the clearing, Morty paused to watch them, their flickering lights reflecting the rhythm of his own attentive presence. He thought of the months and seasons that had passed, of the patient lessons life had offered: resilience, attentiveness, empathy, and the quiet strength of simply being present. He sensed that these threads stretched far beyond the woods, into realms he had yet to see, waiting patiently for him to notice. There was no urgency, only a gentle certainty that his awareness and care would guide him toward experiences just beyond the familiar, preparing him for worlds yet to unfold. As night gathered fully, Morty returned to his room, carrying the soft hum of presence like a warm cloak. He traced constellations on the windowpane, imagining invisible currents weaving through sky, earth, and the living threads he had witnessed. Sleep rose slowly, like a gentle tide, carrying with it the reassurance that his attentiveness, care, and quiet understanding would continue to guide him toward experiences yet to unfold. And as he exhaled beneath his covers, Morty surrendered fully, feeling the quiet certainty that the universe, patient and vast, would continue to whisper its secrets in time, and he would continue to listen softly, attentively, and with care, ready for the gentle unfolding of worlds just beyond the familiar.